Our circulatory and respiratory systems work together. I like this diagram because it helps illustrate how the heart works as a pump for two different systems, and it's kind of the interface between those two systems. So here you have the heart in the center, and you can see that some blood is pumped into the lungs where it's then oxygenated. That oxygenated blood then returns to the heart. Then the heart beats and pumps that oxygenated blood into the body. Now this diagram isn't anatomically correct, it's just illustrating how those two systems are separate. In the center you can see the heart, and the heart is, it first pumps unoxygenated blood, that's blood that's low in oxygen, to the lungs, and that's that blue blood. The artery, the pulmonary artery, is where that blue blood is carried. Remember that artery is a word we use for vessels that carry like pressure. So there's a higher pressure going into the lungs, and in this case it's unoxygenated blood. In the lungs that blood becomes oxygenated, and then it leaves the lungs through the pulmonary vein. Remember, veins are under lower pressure. That pulmonary vein then enters the heart, and then the heart beats and pumps that oxygenated blood into the body through the aorta. In this case, the aorta goes through an area that looks like a network of veins, the capillaries of peripheral tissues. You can think of that area as your whole body's network of vasculature that's carrying blood to every tissue that needs oxygen. So that oxygenated blood enters the body, it perfuses that oxygen into your body, into cells that need oxygen, and it uses up all the oxygen. When all that oxygen is used up, it then returns to the body in that blue post-cava and pre-cava, and that's where unoxygenated blood is then returned to the lungs after the heart beats. It returns to the lungs to be then oxygenated again. So in this way, you can see that the circulatory system and the respiratory system work together to oxygenate blood and then to move that blood throughout the body. And that all happens through your heart. Your respiratory system functions to take in oxygen, to take in air through a breath. And that breath is aided by the diaphragm. You can see here these two lungs, and on the bottom there's a big membrane called the diaphragm, and that is under muscular control. So when the diaphragm pulls down, it creates negative pressure in your lungs, and that pulls air into your lungs. The air passes through your nasal cavity, through your pharynx or your throat, and through your larynx, which is your voice box, and it makes its way down to the trachea. The trachea's function is to funnel that air into the lungs and exhaled air back out of the body. Air enters the lungs through the primary bronchi. The primary bronchus divides, creating smaller and smaller bronchi until the passages are under 1 millimeter in diameter, and then they're called bronchioles as they split and spread through the lung. Like the trachea, the bronchus and bronchioles are made of cartilage and smooth muscle. Alveolar ducts are attached to the end of each respiratory bronchiole. At the end of each duct are alveolar sacs, each containing 20 to 30 alveoli. Gas exchange occurs only in the alveoli. The alveoli are thin-walled and look like tiny bubbles within the sacs. The alveoli are in direct contact with the capillaries of the circulatory system. That contact makes sure that oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli to the blood. In addition, carbon dioxide will diffuse from the blood into the alveoli to be exhaled. Remember, it's a two-part process. When you inhale, you're taking in oxygen, and when you exhale, you're exhaling CO2, the byproduct of respiration. Once the blood is oxygenated, it then returns to the heart through the pulmonary vein. In our lab, we'll go through the anatomy of the heart to better understand the flow of blood in and out of the heart, and also to better understand the chambers of the heart. The pumping of the heart is a function of the cardiac muscle cells, or cardiomyocytes. Adjacent cells are connected by intercalated discs found only in cardiac muscles. These connections allow the electronic signals to travel directly to neighboring muscle cells. Blood leaving the heart then goes through a complex network of blood vessels throughout the body. We'll look at these closer in lab, but essentially arteries take blood away from the heart. The main artery of the systemic circulation is the aorta. It branches into 5 major arteries that take blood to different limbs and organs. Arteries farther away from the heart have more muscle tissue in their walls and can constrict to affect the flow rates of blood. Remember, one of the responses to cold weather is the constriction of vessels in your extremities that helps shunt blood towards your core. Arterioles diverge into capillary beds. Capillary beds contain a huge number of capillaries that branch among the cells of the body. Capillaries are narrow diameter tubes that can fit a single red blood cell and are the sites for exchange of nutrients, waste, and oxygen with tissues at a cellular level. Fluid also leaks from blood into the interstitial spaces from the capillaries. Veins are blood vessels that bring blood high in carbon dioxide back to the heart. Veins are not as thick-walled as arteries because they're under lower pressure, and they have valves along their length that prevent backflow of blood away from the heart. The major veins drain blood from the same organs and limbs that major arteries supply.